As I scanned the restaurant for the client I was meeting, I spotted my ex-wife, Emma. She was with a slightly overweight, middle-aged man who looked like he had once been fit. His tailored suit and confident demeanor screamed money. Emma sat close to him, her face radiating happiness and contentment. Standing in the foyer, memories of our past came rushing back. It had been 3 years since our divorce, but the emotions felt as raw as if it had happened yesterday. I tried to shake off the flood of memories and focus on why I was there, but it was impossible to ignore the irony of the situation. Instead of sitting next to her, I was an outsider looking in. My journey to this point started with a business trip to Albany, a trip that was supposed to be uneventful but turned my life upside down. I had planned the overnight trip to avoid a long drive back. Barely an hour into the journey, my client called to cancel our meeting due to an emergency. He was apologetic, but I assured him we could reschedule. Despite the inconvenience, I was relieved. I hadn't been looking forward to the drive. I decided to head back home early, hoping to surprise Emma with a romantic dinner. When I arrived on our street, I noticed 3 unfamiliar cars parked in our driveway. Emma often invited her friends over when I was away, so I didn't think much of it. I parked my car on the street and walked into the house, expecting everything to be normal. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Clothes were strewn across the living room floor, and then I heard it. Emma's unmistakable voice, not calling for help but in the throes of passion. My heart sank. I realized my wife was with someone else, multiple someones. I felt a wave of devastation and betrayal. Summoning all my courage, I crept upstairs and saw them. Emma with 3 men, including her boss, Greg. They were treating her in ways I had never imagined. I backed away quietly. They were so engrossed they didn't notice me. I went to my office, found my digital camera, and returned to record evidence for my lawyer. I only filmed for a few minutes. It was all I could handle. Leaving the house, I deflated the tires on their cars, including Emma's. With a malicious grin, I knew they wouldn't be leaving quickly. I called Emma's phone repeatedly until she answered, feigning concern about my trip. Her nervous responses confirmed her guilt. I locked the door behind her and called the police, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change our lives forever. As I stood in the foyer of the restaurant, watching Emma with her new companion, memories I had tried to bury began to resurface. It was like a movie playing in my mind, each scene more painful than the last. I remembered the early days of our relationship, the laughter, the shared dreams, and the promises of forever. But those sweet memories were quickly overshadowed by the darker ones that followed. 3 years ago, my life took a dramatic turn. I had planned an overnight trip to Albany for a business meeting. It was supposed to be a simple trip, but it turned into the day everything fell apart. An hour into my drive, my client called to cancel our meeting. He had been in a minor car accident and was unable to make it. Relieved that he was okay, I turned my car around and headed home, thinking about how to surprise Emma with an impromptu romantic evening. Driving along our street, I noticed 3 unfamiliar cars parked in our driveway. Emma often invited her friends over when I was out of town, so I thought nothing of it. As I walked into the house, I was greeted by an unsettling sight. Clothes were scattered across the living room floor, and then I heard her voice. Emma's unmistakable voice, filled with an intensity one had never heard before. My heart pounded as I made my way upstairs. What I saw next shattered my world. Emma was with 3 men, including her boss, Greg. They were treating her with a level of disrespect that made me feel sick to my stomach. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what I was seeing. I quietly backed away, my mind racing with a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Desperate to gather evidence, I grabbed my digital camera from my office and returned to the bedroom. I recorded a few minutes of the scene, capturing enough to show my lawyer. The sight of Emma's face, twisted in pleasure and completely unaware of my presence, was almost too much to bear. I retreated downstairs, my mind numb. Determined to take action, I deflated the tires on all the cars in the driveway, including Emma's. With a sense of grim satisfaction, I knew they wouldn't be leaving quickly. I repeatedly called Emma's phone until she answered, her voice betraying her guilt. Locking the door behind her, I called the police and reported a break-in, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose the truth and forever alter the course of our lives. These memories, though painful, had become a part of me. They were the scars of a past that had taught me hard lessons about trust, love, and betrayal. As I stood there, watching Emma laugh with her new partner, I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. My life had moved on, but the past would always be a part of me. The trip to Albany was supposed to be routine, a straightforward business meeting with a longtime client. I had decided to make it an overnight stay to avoid a grueling drive back and forth. Little did I know, this simple decision would unravel my life in ways I couldn't imagine. I left home early in the afternoon, kissed Emma goodbye, and told her I'd be back the next day. She smiled, told me to drive safely, and to not worry about a thing. I believed her, trusting her as I always had. As I drove, I thought about how lucky I was to have someone like her. She had always been my rock, or so I thought. About an hour into the trip, my phone rang. It was my client, Paul. His voice was shaky as he explained he had been in a minor accident. His car had slid on some ice, but thankfully, he wasn't hurt. He apologized profusely for the late cancellation, and I assured him it was fine. We agreed to reschedule the meeting for the following week. With the meeting canceled, I turned the car around and headed back home. As I drove, I thought about surprising Emma. Maybe we could have a spontaneous date night. I pictured her face lighting up with surprise and happiness when she saw me walk through the door earlier than expected. The thought made me smile. Traffic was light, and I made good time getting back. The sun was setting as I turned onto our street. That's when I noticed the 3 unfamiliar cars in our driveway. It was odd, but I rationalized that Emma had invited some friends over. She often did that when I was away, to keep herself company. I parked my car on the street and walked toward the house, already imagining the joy of spending an unexpected evening with my wife. The moment I opened the front door, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet, but there was a strange tension in the air. Then I saw the clothes scattered across the living room floor. My heart started to pound, a sense of dread washing over me. As I stood there, trying to make sense of the scene, I heard Emma's voice from upstairs. It wasn't a call for help. It was the unmistakable sound of pleasure, but not the kind shared between a husband and wife. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My legs moved on their own, carrying me up the stairs, each step feeling like a march toward doom. At the top, I peeked into the bedroom. The sight before me confirmed my worst fears. Emma, with 3 men, one of whom I recognized as her boss, Greg. They were completely absorbed in their act, oblivious to my presence. I stumbled back downstairs, my mind racing. The spontaneous joy I had envisioned was replaced with a cold, hard resolve. I grabbed my digital camera, the one I used to capture family vacations and happy moments, and turned it into a tool for gathering evidence. The betrayal was too much to process, but I knew I needed proof. As I filmed, I felt detached, almost robotic. I captured enough to show my lawyer, then turned off the camera and retreated to the garage. I deflated the tires of all the cars, ensuring they wouldn't leave quickly. My actions were methodical, driven by a mix of anger and heartbreak. Back in the house, I called Emma's phone repeatedly until she answered. Her voice was breathless, trying to cover up the situation. I feigned concern, telling her my meeting was canceled and I'd be home soon. Her nervous responses confirmed her guilt. With that, I set the final piece of my plan in motion, ready to face the aftermath of a shattered marriage. As I sat in the driveway, the deflated tires and the clothes strewn inside were clear indicators of the chaos that awaited me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and stepped out of the car. My mind was racing, replaying the image of Emma with those men. Each step towards the front door felt heavier, laden with dread and disbelief. I entered the house cautiously, the eerie silence only amplifying my apprehension. The living room was a mess. Clothes and shoes were everywhere. It was a scene of utter disarray, completely unlike Emma's usually meticulous nature. I had never imagined walking into such a situation. I made my way to the staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. Every creak of the wooden steps echoed loudly in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I heard muffled voices and laughter coming from our bedroom. A surge of anger and hurt coursed through me, but I forced myself to stay composed. I needed to know the full extent of Emma's betrayal. Peeking around the bedroom door frame, I saw her with 3 men, including her boss, Greg. They were too engrossed in their activities to notice me. I stood there, watching in stunned silence. It was a surreal and painful sight, one that seared into my memory. Emma, my wife of 10 years, was behaving in ways I had never seen before, ways I never thought possible. The scene felt like a twisted nightmare. I backed away quietly, my mind numb. I went to my office and grabbed my digital camera. The decision to record the scene wasn't driven by revenge, but by a need for evidence. I knew I would need proof for the inevitable confrontation and legal proceedings. With shaky hands, I returned to the bedroom and started filming. I captured their faces, their actions, and Emma's blatant betrayal. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off the camera and retreated downstairs. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, calculated resolve. I deflated the tires on all the cars, ensuring they wouldn't leave quickly. It was a small act of defiance, a way to regain some control in a situation that had spiraled beyond my grasp. I called Emma's phone repeatedly until she finally answered, her voice breathless and shaky. I feigned concern, telling her my meeting was canceled and I'd be home soon. Her nervous responses confirmed her guilt. I hung up and dialed 911, reporting suspicious activity and potential break-in. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. Minutes later, I heard the police sirens approaching. The officers arrived, and I explained the situation, painting a picture of concern and fear. As the police began questioning Emma and the men, I stood back, watching the scene unfold. Emma's face was a mix of shock and shame as she tried to explain herself. The men were equally flustered, their bravado crumbling under the scrutiny. The realization of what I had discovered and the irreversible change it brought to my life settled in. My marriage was over, shattered by the shocking discovery of Emma's infidelity. The woman I had loved and trusted had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. As I watched the police handle the situation, I knew there was no going back. My life had been irrevocably altered, and the journey ahead would be one of healing and rebuilding. With the police handling the immediate chaos, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if the initial shock had frozen my emotions, leaving only a cold, determined resolve. I knew I had to act swiftly and decisively. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw to ignore. My mind raced with plans as I retreated to my office, a sanctuary in this sea of turmoil. First, I needed to ensure I had irrefutable evidence. I plugged my digital camera into the computer and downloaded the footage. Watching it again was painful, but necessary. I needed clear shots of Emma and the three men, especially Greg. Every frame was a dagger to my heart, but it also fueled my resolve. I burned multiple copies onto DVDs, knowing I would need them for the legal battle ahead. Next, I called Ted, my best friend and lawyer. He was someone I could trust completely, someone who had always stood by me. Ted picked up on the second ring, his voice full of concern as I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting, his silence a testament to the gravity of my words. "Ted, I have video evidence. I need you to handle this," I said, my voice steady but hollow. "Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning," he replied. "We'll start the paperwork for the divorce and take legal action against Greg and anyone else involved." After hanging up, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time to take action against those who had wronged me. I went to the garage, grabbed my toolbox, and began deflating the tires on all the cars in the driveway. It was a petty act, but it gave me a small measure of satisfaction. They wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. I returned to the house and gathered all of Emma's belongings. Her clothes, jewelry, and personal items were thrown into garbage bags. I dragged them outside and dumped them on the front lawn. This wasn't just about getting rid of her possessions. It was a symbolic act, a way to purge her from my life. As I was carrying the last bag out, Emma approached me, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "Bobby, please, let's talk about this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "The time for talking is over, Emma," I replied coldly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences." I locked the door behind her, shutting out her protests. I called her phone one last time, leaving a voicemail that was both simple and final. "I've called the police. They're handling everything. Don't come back." Finally, I sat down in the living room, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I knew the hardest part was still ahead, facing the legal battles, the social fallout, and the emotional toll of a broken marriage. But for now, I had taken the first steps towards reclaiming my life. The path ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on. The police left, having determined that no crime had been committed since Emma admitted to inviting the men over. The house felt eerily quiet again, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just hours before. I knew the hardest part was yet to come, confronting Emma and dealing with the fallout. Emma stood in the driveway, her eyes red from crying, while the men tried to leave discreetly. I stepped outside, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. The air was thick with tension as I approached her, the memories of what I had witnessed still fresh and painful. "Bobby, please, let's talk," Emma pleaded, her voice wavering. I looked at her, the woman I had loved and trusted for 10 years, now a stranger who had shattered my world. "There's nothing to talk about, Emma. You made your choice." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to hurt you. How could you not expect this to hurt me?" I replied, my voice rising. "You were with 3 men, Emma. One of them was your boss. In our home, in our bed." She flinched at my words, but I continued. "I've called Ted. We're filing for divorce, and I have all the evidence I need." Her face went pale. "Evidence? What do you mean?" "I recorded everything, and I have copies," I said, watching as the realization dawned on her. "This isn't just about us. Greg and the others will face consequences too." Emma seemed to collapse into herself, her shoulders slumping as she began to cry. "I'm so sorry, Bobby. I've made such a terrible mistake." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but quickly extinguished it. "Sorry doesn't change what you did. You chose to betray me, and now you have to deal with the consequences." Just then, Greg emerged from the house, his expression a mix of arrogance and irritation. "Bobby, let's be reasonable here," he began, attempting to sound authoritative. "We can resolve this like adults." I turned my gaze to him, fury boiling just beneath the surface. "You have no right to speak to me about reason or being an adult. You violated my trust, and you did it in my home." Greg tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Look, this can get messy for all of us. Maybe we can come to some sort of agreement. I shook my head, incredulous. An agreement? You think there's anything you can offer that would make this right? Emma stepped forward, placing a hand on Greg's arm. Greg, just go. This is between Bobby and me. He looked ready to argue, but then thought better of it. He walked away, leaving Emma and me alone. She seemed to wilt under my gaze, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. Bobby, I know I've lost your trust, but I don't want to lose everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, can we find a way to work through this? I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of the love I once felt for her. Emma, this isn't something we can just work through. You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed our marriage. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know I did. But I want to make things right, if that's even possible. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. You need to understand that there are consequences for your actions. Ted and I will handle the divorce proceedings. As for everything else, I need time to process this. Emma's eyes searched mine for any sign of hope, but I couldn't offer her any. Take your things and leave. I need space to think. She nodded silently, turning to gather her belongings. As she walked away, I felt a heavy weight lift slightly from my shoulders, but the pain and betrayal still lingered. The confrontation was over, but the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. For now, I had to focus on picking up the pieces of my shattered life and moving forward, one step at a time. After Emma left, the house felt emptier than ever. The echoes of the past day's events haunted every corner, but I couldn't afford to dwell on them. Instead, I focused on the plan Ted and I had devised. We needed to move quickly and decisively. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about ensuring that those who had wronged me faced the consequences. The next morning, I met Ted at his office, the envelope with the evidence clutched in my hand. Ted greeted me with a firm handshake and a determined look. Let's get started, he said, leading me to his conference room. We spread out the DVDs, photos, and copies of the emails I had found on Emma's computer. Ted examined each piece meticulously, making notes and outlining our strategy. We have a strong case, he said, his voice steady. Greg and the others won't know what hit them. Our first step was to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, backed by the overwhelming evidence I had collected. Ted assured me that the video footage, combined with the explicit emails and photos, would make my case ironclad. He began drafting the necessary paperwork, outlining the terms that would protect my assets and ensure a fair settlement. Next, we discussed taking legal action against Greg and his associates. Ted explained that we could pursue them not only for their personal actions, but also for any potential violations of workplace conduct policies. Greg has a lot to lose, Ted said with a grim smile. His career, his reputation, everything. As Ted worked on the legal documents, I focused on the practical aspects of the plan. I made copies of all the evidence, storing them in multiple secure locations. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I also started documenting every interaction with Emma and the others, creating a detailed timeline of events that would support our case. Ted and I also decided to bring in a private investigator to gather additional information. We needed to know if there were other instances of infidelity or misconduct that we could leverage. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel, promised to dig deep and uncover any hidden truths. Meanwhile, Ted reached out to his contacts in the media. We didn't want to go public yet, but having the option to expose Greg and his associates would give us additional leverage. Ted's connections ensured that, if needed, we could apply pressure from multiple angles. As the days passed, the pieces of our plan began to fall into place. The divorce papers were filed, and the initial legal notices were sent to Greg and the others involved. The response was swift and predictable, denial and attempts at damage control. But Ted was prepared for this, countering every move with precision and unwavering determination. The pressure began to mount, and cracks started to appear in Greg's facade. Rumors circulated within his company, and whispers of scandal spread like wildfire. We knew it was only a matter of time before he would have to confront the reality of his actions. For me, the unfolding plan was a source of strength. It gave me a sense of purpose and control in a situation where I had felt powerless. The betrayal still hurt, and the road to healing was long. But each step forward was a step towards reclaiming my life and securing justice for the wrongs I had endured. Ted and I knew that our legal strategy needed to be airtight. We were going up against powerful individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their reputations and careers. Sitting in Ted's office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and evidence, I felt a sense of determination. This was my chance to fight back, to reclaim my dignity. First, we need to address the divorce proceedings, Ted began, his voice calm and methodical. We'll file on grounds of adultery and seek a favorable settlement. The evidence you've gathered will make it clear that Emma's infidelity is indisputable. Ted outlined our approach. We would demand full ownership of the house and a significant portion of our joint assets. Given the severity of Emma's betrayal and the impact it had on my life, Ted was confident that the court would rule in our favor. Additionally, we would ensure that Emma received no alimony. She made her bed, and now she has to lie in it, Ted said grimly. Next, we turned our attention to Greg and his associates. We can pursue them on multiple fronts, Ted explained. We'll start with a civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and invasion of privacy. The video footage and emails will support our claim that their actions were malicious and calculated. Ted's plan was to hit them where it hurt most, their wallets and their reputations. The civil lawsuit would seek substantial damages, and Ted was confident that the threat of a public trial would pressure them into a settlement. They'll want to avoid the embarrassment and the potential fallout from their employers and families, he said. In parallel, we would leverage the workplace conduct violations. Ted drafted formal complaints to be submitted to Greg's company's HR department and the Professional Licensing Board. Their behavior was not only unethical but potentially illegal, Ted noted. We'll make sure their employers know exactly what kind of people they have on their payroll. Ted also suggested obtaining restraining orders against Greg and the other men involved. This would prevent any further harassment and provide an additional layer of legal protection. We need to show them that we're serious and that there will be consequences for their actions, Ted said firmly. As we worked through the details, Rachel, our private investigator, provided updates on her findings. She had uncovered more dirt on Greg and his associates, including past indiscretions and shady dealings. This new information would be invaluable in strengthening our case and applying additional pressure. Ted's network of media contacts was also on standby, ready to expose the scandal if necessary. A well-timed leak could be our ace in the hole, Ted said, a steely glint in his eye. If they refuse to settle, we'll make sure the whole world knows what they've done. Over the next few days, the legal wheels began to turn. Divorce papers were served to Emma, and the civil lawsuit was filed. Formal complaints were submitted to Greg's employer and professional boards. The initial reactions were predictable: denials, threats, and attempts at intimidation. But Ted and I were prepared for this. We countered every move with legal precision and unwavering resolve. Emma tried to reach out to me several times, pleading for a chance to talk. But I was done talking. The time for words was over. Now, it was about action. With Ted by my side and a solid legal strategy in place, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but I was no longer a passive victim. I was an active participant in my own destiny, ready to face whatever came next with strength and determination. Days passed, and the legal proceedings moved forward with relentless momentum. I kept my distance from Emma, but the emotional toll weighed heavily on me. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was Emma, her voice cracking with desperation. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. I needed to hear her out, if only to gain closure. The cafe was quiet, almost serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. Emma sat at a corner table, looking worn and anxious. As I approached, she glanced up, her eyes red from crying. We exchanged a tense greeting before I sat down. "Bobby, I know you hate me," she began, her voice trembling, "but I need to explain." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath and began her confession. "It started about a year ago," she said, her eyes fixed on the table. "Greg and I were working late, and one thing led to another. It was just a fling at first, but then it became something more." My stomach churned, but I kept my expression neutral. "Why, Emma? Why did you do it?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was feeling neglected, unappreciated. Greg made me feel special, desired. I know it's not an excuse, but it's the truth." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting to keep my composure. "So, you decided to betray me? To destroy our marriage?" "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just spiraled out of control. The other men, they were Greg's idea. He said it would keep things exciting, that it was just harmless fun." "Harmless?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You call what I walked in on harmless?" Emma flinched but didn't back down. "I know I've hurt you, Bobby, more than I can ever make up for. But I was lost, and I made terrible choices. I'm so sorry." Her apology hung in the air, a fragile thread of regret. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "What about the emails? The videos?" She nodded, wiping her tears. "Greg and I thought we were being discreet, but obviously we weren't. I should have stopped it long ago, but I was too caught up in it all." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and pity. "Emma, you didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed our trust, our life together." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I know I did, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." For a moment, I considered reaching out to her, offering some small comfort. But the wounds were too fresh, too deep. "Emma, I'm moving forward with the divorce. Ted will handle everything. I don't want to drag this out any longer than necessary." She nodded, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. I understand. I deserve whatever happens. As I stood to leave, she looked up at me one last time. Bobby, I really am sorry. For everything. I paused, then nodded. I know you are. But that doesn't change what you did. With that, I walked out of the cafe, feeling a strange sense of relief. Emma's confession hadn't absolved her of her actions, but it had given me the closure I needed. I was ready to move forward, to rebuild my life from the ruins she had left behind. The following week, the negotiation process began in earnest. Ted arranged a meeting with Greg and his legal team. We chose a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown office building. The tension was palpable as we all sat down, the air thick with unspoken hostility and apprehension. Greg's lawyer, a slick and polished man named Martin, started the meeting with a tone of forced civility. We're here to resolve this matter as amicably as possible, he began, his eyes darting between me and Ted. Let's try to find a solution that works for everyone. Ted leaned back in his chair, exuding calm confidence. We're willing to listen, but understand that our primary goal is justice for Bobby. The actions of your client and his associates have caused significant harm. Martin nodded, though I could see the frustration in his eyes. We understand. Greg is prepared to offer a substantial settlement to avoid further legal action and public scandal. We're proposing $500,000. I felt a surge of anger at the offer. It was insulting, considering the depth of the betrayal and the evidence we had. Ted remained unruffled. That amount is far from adequate. We have substantial evidence of misconduct that could severely damage Greg's career and reputation. We're prepared to go to court if necessary. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Martin pressed on. A court battle would be lengthy and costly for both sides. Surely, we can come to a more reasonable figure. What are you seeking? Ted leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Martin's. We want $2.5 million. That's the amount we believe compensates for the emotional and psychological damage inflicted on Bobby. Martin's composure faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. That's a steep figure. We need to consider the financial implications for Greg and his company. That's your problem, not ours, Ted replied coolly. Our concern is making sure Bobby receives fair compensation. Your client's actions were reprehensible, and we have no obligation to make this easy for him. There was a long silence as Martin and Greg exchanged glances. It was clear they hadn't anticipated such a firm stance. Finally, Martin spoke again, his tone more conciliatory. We'll need time to discuss this with our client. Can we reconvene in a few days? Ted nodded. Take your time, but know that our patience is limited, and our resolve is strong. We expect a serious counteroffer. As we left the conference room, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The negotiation was far from over, but Ted's confidence reassured me. We were standing our ground, demanding the justice I deserved. Back in Ted's office, we reviewed our strategy. They're trying to lowball us, but we won't budge, Ted said firmly. We have the evidence, and they know it. They'll come back with a better offer. I nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. Thanks, Ted. I don't know how I'd handle this without you. He smiled. We're in this together, Bobby. We'll get you through this. Over the next few days, I focused on staying strong. Emma's confession had given me clarity, and now the negotiations were giving me a sense of purpose. The battle was far from over, but with Ted by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. When the call finally came, it was Martin on the other end. His tone was less confident, more resigned. We've discussed your terms with Greg. He's willing to settle for $2 million. That's our final offer. Ted glanced at me, and I nodded. It was less than we had asked for, but still a significant victory. We accept, Ted said, sealing the deal. As I hung up the phone, a sense of relief washed over me. The negotiations were over, and while the wounds from Emma's betrayal would take time to heal, I had taken a major step towards reclaiming my life. With the settlement in place, I could begin to rebuild, knowing that justice had been served. With the settlement negotiations behind us, Ted and I turned our attention to the next target, the Ace Tennis Club. The footage we had of Emma with Tony, the tennis instructor, was damning. We intended to make sure the club's management faced the consequences of their actions, and the members were aware of the scandalous behavior occurring under their noses. Ted arranged a meeting with Harry Riel, the club's owner. We met in his office, a luxurious space that spoke to the club's elite clientele. Harry greeted us with a forced smile, clearly aware of the storm brewing on his horizon. Gentlemen, let's get straight to the point, Ted began, wasting no time. We have evidence of your employee, Tony Simba, engaging in inappropriate conduct with my client's wife, Emma. This happened on your premises, during club hours, and with your apparent knowledge. Harry's smile faltered. I understand this is a delicate matter, but what exactly are you proposing? Ted pulled out a portable DVD player and pressed play. The footage of Tony and Emma in the locker room played on the screen. Harry's face turned pale as he watched, the weight of the situation sinking in. This is just a snippet of what we have, Ted said, pausing the video. There are more recordings, more incidents. This is a gross violation of your club's policies and the trust of your members. Harry tried to regain his composure. What do you want? First, Tony Simba is to be terminated immediately, Ted stated. Second, we require a settlement for the emotional distress and damage caused to my client. We're asking for $3 million. Harry's eyes widened. $3 million? That's outrageous. Ted leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Consider the alternative. This footage goes public, your club's reputation is destroyed, and you face multiple lawsuits from other members who will undoubtedly come forward. The choice is yours. Harry sat back, clearly weighing his options. After a long silence, he spoke. I'll need time to consult with my legal team. You have 48 hours, Ted replied. We won't wait any longer. As we left the club, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the last confrontation before I could start moving forward. Ted's confidence bolstered my own, but the uncertainty of the outcome still gnawed at me. 2 days later, we received a call from Harry's lawyer. They were willing to settle for $2.5 million and agreed to terminate Tony Simba immediately. It was a victory, albeit a smaller one than we had hoped for, but a victory nonetheless. The settlement was finalized quickly. News of Tony's dismissal spread through the club like wildfire, and whispers of the scandal began to circulate among the members. Harry managed to keep the details out of the media, but the damage to the club's reputation was done. Members started to question what other secrets the club might be hiding, and Harry had a lot of explaining to do. For me, the settlement brought a sense of closure. The people who had wronged me were facing the consequences, and I had the financial means to start anew. The scandal had exposed the truth and shattered the facade of respectability that had hidden so much deceit. With the tennis club scandal behind me, I could finally focus on rebuilding my life. The journey had been painful and exhausting, but I had emerged stronger, with a clearer sense of who I was and what I wanted. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The past was behind me, and a new chapter was about to begin. With the settlement secured and the scandals exposed, the process of dividing our lives began. The legal victories were satisfying, but they also signaled the start of another daunting task: disentangling our shared existence. The house, the finances, the personal belongings, everything had to be sorted, divided, and finalized. I returned home one last time to collect my remaining possessions. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. The memories of happier times clashed with the bitter taste of betrayal. Emma was not there, as agreed. She had moved in with her parents temporarily, giving us both the space needed to finalize the divorce. The first step was to inventory our assets. Ted and I went through every room, documenting what belonged to whom. The house, a symbol of our shared dreams, was the most contentious item. Emma had agreed to relinquish her claim in exchange for a larger share of our savings. It was a painful compromise, but one I was willing to make to keep my home. Next, we tackled the financial accounts. Ted arranged for a forensic accountant to ensure that everything was fair and transparent. Emma and I had joint accounts, investments, and retirement funds. The accountant's meticulous work revealed no hidden surprises, and the division was made as equitable as possible. Emma received a significant portion of our liquid assets, while I retained the house and other tangible assets. Dividing our personal belongings was a more intimate and painful process. I went through photos, mementos, and shared items, separating mine from hers. Some things were easy to split: the furniture, the kitchenware, the electronics. But others, like the photos from our travels or the gifts we had given each other over the years, were harder to let go of. Each item held a piece of our shared history, now tainted by the betrayal. In the midst of this, Emma reached out to me. She wanted to discuss how we would handle the news of our divorce with friends and family. We met at a neutral location, the tension between us palpable. She looked tired, the toll of our unraveling lives evident on her face. "Bobby, I think we should present a united front," she said softly, "for the sake of our families and friends." I nodded, understanding her point, but feeling the weight of the deception. "I agree. We can tell them we've decided to part ways amicably. They don't need to know the details." She looked relieved. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy." "None of this is easy, Emma," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. "But it's necessary." We drafted a joint statement, informing our loved ones of our decision to divorce. We kept it simple, stating that we had grown apart and decided it was best to separate. The statement was a facade, hiding the messy reality of our split, but it was better than airing our dirty laundry. The final step was signing the divorce papers. We met at Ted's office, the documents laid out before us. Emma and I exchanged a final, sorrowful glance before we signed, our signatures marking the end of our marriage. The moment was surreal, the finality of it all sinking in. As I left Ted's office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. The dividing lines had been drawn, our lives separated into distinct halves, It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. With the past firmly behind me, I walked towards an unknown future, determined to rebuild and rediscover who I was beyond the pain and betrayal. The lines had been drawn, and it was time to move forward, free from the shadows of a broken marriage. With the divorce finalized and the settlement secured, a strange sense of freedom enveloped me. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I could look forward to the future. The process of rebuilding my life had begun, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. I decided to start with the house. The memories of Emma were too deeply embedded in its walls, so I embarked on a project to transform it into a space that reflected my new reality. I repainted the walls, choosing fresh, vibrant colors that symbolized renewal. I replaced the furniture, opting for a modern style that felt uniquely mine. Each change, each improvement, was a step towards reclaiming my space and my identity. Next, I turned my attention to my career. The settlement money provided a cushion, but I needed a sense of purpose. I reached out to old contacts, exploring new opportunities and rekindling professional relationships. It wasn't long before I found a consulting gig that excited me, offering both a challenge and a fresh start. The work was demanding, but it kept my mind occupied and gave me a sense of accomplishment. As my professional life stabilized, I focused on my personal growth. I started therapy, something I had long resisted but now realized was essential for healing. My therapist, Dr. Lang, was patient and insightful, helping me navigate the complex emotions of betrayal, anger, and grief. Through our sessions, I began to understand myself better, confronting the pain head-on and learning to let go. Part of my healing process involved reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering my love for the outdoors. The physical activity and the camaraderie of the group were therapeutic, providing a sense of community and support. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding fulfillment in helping others and giving back to the community. One of the most significant steps in my journey was addressing my physical health. The stress of the past year had taken its toll, and I was determined to rebuild my strength and vitality. I joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, and committed to a regular exercise routine. The physical transformation mirrored my emotional recovery, each workout a testament to my resilience and determination. As the months passed, I began to feel a sense of balance returning to my life. The house, now fully renovated, felt like a sanctuary. My career was thriving, and my personal life was enriched by new friendships and experiences. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become a part of my story, a testament to my strength and capacity for growth. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes, I stumbled upon a photo album from my marriage to Emma. Flipping through the pages, I felt a wave of nostalgia, but also a sense of closure. Those memories were part of my journey, but they didn't dictate my future. I carefully packed the album away, a symbol of my past that I could now look at without bitterness. With each passing day, I embraced the possibilities of new beginnings. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was also filled with promise. I had survived the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever came next with hope and resilience. The new beginnings were not just about moving on from the past, but also about embracing the future with an open heart and a determined spirit. I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, one filled with potential, joy, and the unwavering belief that the best was yet to come. Months had passed since the divorce was finalized and life had started to regain a semblance of normalcy. The wounds had begun to heal, and I found myself looking forward more often than I looked back. It was during this period of rebuilding that I unexpectedly ran into Emma one last time. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at the local farmer's market, enjoying the fresh air and vibrant atmosphere. The market had become a part of my new routine, a place to connect with the community and find peace in the simple pleasures of life. As I browsed the stalls, selecting fresh produce and artisan bread, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Bobby." I turned to see Emma standing there, looking both surprised and nervous. She held a basket of vegetables, and her appearance was markedly different. She seemed more subdued, almost fragile, a stark contrast to the confident woman I once knew. "Emma," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. The initial shock of seeing her was tempered by a sense of calm I hadn't felt before. We stood there for a moment, the bustling market around us fading into the background. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice tinged with regret. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I come here often," I replied simply. "It's part of my new routine." She nodded, glancing down at her basket. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Bobby, about everything that happened." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "I know I can't undo the past, and I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I've changed. I'm working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did." Her words were sincere, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the person she might become. "That's good to hear, Emma." Everyone deserves a chance to heal and grow. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. I hope you're doing well. You deserve happiness, Bobby. I am, I said, offering a small smile. I'm finding my way, one step at a time. We stood in silence for a few more moments, the weight of our shared history lingering in the air. Then, Emma took a deep breath and extended her hand. I hope we can both find peace. I shook her hand, feeling a sense of closure. I hope so too, Emma. Take care of yourself. With that, we parted ways, each of us heading in different directions. As I continued through the market, I felt lighter, as if a chapter had finally been closed. The encounter with Emma was unexpected but necessary. A final step in letting go of the past and embracing the future. I bought my groceries and left the market, the sun shining brightly overhead. The final encounter with Emma had brought a sense of resolution I hadn't realized I needed. It was the end of one journey and the beginning of another, filled with new possibilities and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. As I drove home, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain and betrayal were behind me, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and an unwavering spirit. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was no longer overshadowed by the past. With each new day, I would continue to rebuild, rediscover, and redefine my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.